Well, hey there. Hopefully you are enjoying the Keto Masterclass. And I know we've gone through a lot of material throughout this masterclass. And today my goal is to go over the most common questions that you guys have asked. And you guys have asked some really great questions. So we're going to dive into that. And, I want to remind you guys to take advantage of the offer to get the entire 9-part Keto Masterclass docu-series, as well as all the special bonuses that we have with it for the special offer that we have. So make sure that you're taking advantage of that. There should be, some sort of button on the screen that you're listening to, which gives you that special offer, or you could check in the show notes here where you can take a look, and just consider if that offer is right for you so you can own all the materials for yourself. So with that said, let's jump into some of these questions. Angela asks, how quickly should I expect to lose weight following a keto diet? Very common question. And it really depends on each individual. Each individual is a little bit different. Most people will lose somewhere around 5 pounds or so within the first week or two. And much of that is actually water weight, because when your body starts burning fat for fuel and your blood sugar goes down, you start to, lose stored glycogen, which also causes a loss of water. And so it's not necessarily fat weight. The fat weight really comes when your body becomes a better fat burner. So it's usually somewhere, after 2 weeks, maybe 2 to 4 weeks. And for some individuals, it can be 6, 8 weeks or so. And usually what you're looking at is somewhere around, a good conservative measurement is somewhere around a pound a week or so, right? A pound a week is a really good gauge. And so if you are losing a pound a week, and you may lose like 5 or 10 pounds in the first month, a lot of people do. And so you kind of have to factor it out. So if you've lost, let's say you've been doing keto for 3 months, let's say 12 weeks, and you've lost 20 pounds, that's really good. You're above that pound a week mark. Okay. So somewhere around there. And of course, it's going to range depending on how much weight you have to lose. And so, but roughly somewhere around a pound, 1 to 2 pounds a week is really, a good estimate. Should my macros be adjusted as I lose weight? Cindy asks. So when we're looking at macros, we're looking at the ratio of fat to protein to carbohydrates. And so should you adjust it? Not necessarily. You want to find a good sweet spot. I talk about it in the masterclass, somewhere around 60 to 70% of your calories coming from fats, roughly 20 to 30, even 35% coming from protein, and roughly 5 to 10% or so coming from carbohydrates. Now, what you may adjust is as you start to optimize your weight, you may do a carb refeed, right? Or a higher carb day. And when you do that, you may consume, 30% of your calories or so from carbohydrates. You may go up to, 100, 150 grams or so of carbohydrates, but, it would be for a short period of time, like one day, for example. What's the best way to overcome cravings? Tracy asks. I'm having a piece of cake. Would it totally ruin everything I've done so far to have one? So with cravings, a couple things. One is salt. Just putting a little bit of salt on your tongue, I've noticed for a lot of people really helps. When we are electrolyte deficient, which can be very easy, especially when we're going keto, because we have lower insulin levels, so we're excreting more salts and more electrolytes, then we're going to have more cravings. Oftentimes when we're having food cravings, it's really because we are needing electrolytes and we're needing good hydration. So staying hydrated, putting some salts on your tongue, maybe taking an electrolyte powder, maybe something you might consider. That can all help with cravings. Consuming enough protein. When you're in your meals, consume protein to your satiation point. I typically recommend somewhere between 30 to 40 grams of protein in each meal. And that will really help with you being more satiated and having less cravings. So that can be really, really helpful. And then making sure you're sleeping well, right? Making sure you're getting good sleep. If you're not sleeping well, you're probably going to have more cravings. So I would do those things. Now, as far as like having a piece of cake, in the beginning, when you're trying to get keto adapted, it's really good to go 4-6 weeks or so, as low carb as you can, in a sense, get adapted. And then if you have a piece of cake, right, the next day, just jump into like an intermittent fast for 16, 18 hours. You're kind of back in fat burning mode. Okay. Get a good workout in maybe, and that will help burn up that extra sugar, bring your insulin levels down, and that can help you readapt. So that can be helpful. But again, making sure you're sleeping well, making sure you're getting enough electrolytes, making sure you're consuming enough protein in your meal is very key for overcoming cravings. Gary asks, is a keto diet sustainable over a long period? I've read that some doctors say keto is not safe long-term. This really depends on the individual. And so for some people, they feel good in keto for long periods of time, 6 months, a year, 2 years, and they seem to do great. Okay. However, I have also noticed that for some individuals, doing some carb refeeds or some higher carb days just makes it easier on them mentally. And, if their insulin levels are getting too low, right, it can help drive that insulin up. You don't want your insulin to get too low. And that's really, the focus of a ketogenic diet is a diet where you're eating food, but you're keeping your insulin levels down, right? We know fasting helps lower insulin levels, but you need a certain level of insulin. If we're testing it on blood, I like to see your insulin levels somewhere between 2 and 6. Okay. So if your insulin levels are like 1, that's a sign, your insulin levels are really low. And if your insulin levels are too low, you may not activate enough thyroid hormone. You may not have enough free. You may have too much bound hormone, bound estrogen, too high levels of sex hormone binding globulin. So you have too much bound estrogen and bound testosterone, and you don't get the right expression of those hormones, which, for women can cause hair loss, can cause emotional issues, can cause, dry skin, a lot of different unwanted symptoms. And for men can cause, of course, low testosterone. So you may need a little bump in insulin from time to time. And that's where, having a little bit of a higher carb day, like a feast day, like we talk about, can be helpful. Give yourself a little bump in those carbs. And so you just have to experiment and see what you feel best with. So again, that's why I recommend in this masterclass, we go through a process to get into ketosis. Once we get into ketosis, then we're experimenting with carb refeeds, right? And so we're having feast days, let's say once a week or so, and seeing how your body responds. Does that allow you to continue to lose weight if you need to lose weight? Does it allow you to have great energy, mental clarity, and enjoy, foods that are higher in carbohydrates? Does it provide more of that balance to your life? And at the same time, are you still getting great health goals? That's what we have to ask ourselves. And so we have to figure out the right, feast to keto cycle or feast famine cycle for you. And that's, part of the goal of the masterclass is helping you understand how to personalize this whole approach to yourself. Will keto help with depression or anxiety? Sue is asking. Yes. And in the masterclass, I talk about the benefits of ketones on the brain. So as your body gets good at burning fat, the fat gets converted into ketones, or some of the fat does, in the liver. And the ketones are these water-soluble molecules that are smaller than fats that can cross the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain, where they can be used for energy. And so ketones, what are they going to do in the brain? They're going to reduce inflammation in the brain. So we know depression and anxiety are marked by high levels of inflammation in the brain. So we're reducing that inflammation. We're also providing better glutamate to GABA balance. Glutamate is your excitatory neurotransmitter. GABA is like the brakes on the brain. So if you have too much glutamate to GABA, right? So if you have improper ratio, more glutamate than GABA, then you end up with irritability, anxiety, right? So racing brain and an overwhelmed brain. And so it helps balance that. And on top of that, it helps improve mitochondrial function in the brain. And the better the mitochondria, the better energy production in the brain. And therefore, the better your brain activity and the better your mood. So absolutely, it can help with depression, anxiety, a lot of good literature on that. Anne asks, what is the best way to measure ketones or blood sugar to know if I'm in ketosis? Well, the best measurement is actually blood ketones, and your levels, you're looking at a ketone called beta hydroxybutyrate when you're testing the blood. And for nutritional ketosis, 0.5 millimoles is considered nutritional ketosis when you're in ketosis. So you're testing that out. Now with blood sugar, you could test that Typically it's going to stay under 100, probably more like 80, 70, somewhere in that range. And you're going to feel real satiated, right? You may even have your blood sugar drop around 60. And instead of feeling, instead of having cravings and having a headache and feeling tired, you actually feel great. And that's because your ketones are elevated. And so when your blood sugar starts dropping, but you feel good, it's a good sign that you're probably kicking into ketosis, because your brain's either going to run off of the sugar or the ketones. And if the sugar starts dropping like under, 75 or so, and you can't produce ketones, you're not metabolically flexible to do this, then you're most likely going to have anxiety. You're going to have cravings. You're going to have possibly a headache or nausea or, some sort of unwanted symptom. Irritability is another common one, kind of that hangriness that people feel. But if it drops under there and you feel good, you feel satiated, you feel really mentally clear, it's a sign you're in ketosis. And also asks, what level should my ketones be in for ketosis? So when we're testing blood ketones, again, should be 0.5 millimoles or higher. Higher is not necessarily better, and it really depends on the individual, and it depends on your goals, right? Somebody that, for example, is fighting cancer may want to get their ketones higher. That is certainly, a therapeutic approach, possibly if you're fighting neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. However, the more metabolically healthy your body is, the better you're going to use the ketones as an energy source. So just having high blood ketones is a potential energy source, but you're not actually converting that and using that as energy. And so the better you are at using it as energy, theoretically, the lower it's going to drop. And so, we're still studying this and figuring it out, but somewhere in that 0.5 to maybe 2.0 millimole is kind of where the average individual is. Now, if you're doing like more of a extended fast, 2, 3, 4, 5 day fast, it can definitely jump higher, 3, 4, 5, 6, millimoles for sure. But, if you're eating on a regular basis and you're just practicing intermittent fasting, you're rarely going to see it really jump much higher than about 2, maybe 2.5 millimole, somewhere in that range, unless you're really calorie restricting. So you're eating a lower calorie diet as well as, as well as a ketogenic style diet, then it may jump higher. And for therapeutic purposes, that can be done for short periods of time. I'm sticking to my macros. This is a question from Emily. She goes, I'm sticking to my macros, but my calories seem really low. Is that normal? I don't see a lot of information about counting calories. The average individual needs about 2,000 calories a day. The average woman, especially the average male, usually about 2,500 or so. So, you want to consume, roughly around the amount of calories that you need. We're not really trying to slash the calories. If you feel like consuming that amount of calories in, let's say, 2 to maybe 3 eating periods, right? So we don't want snacking. We want to eat in 2 or 3 meals. And if you're finding that consuming 2,000 calories in that period, in that amount of feedings is just too much, like you're just too satiated to do it, then you're naturally going to lower your calories. You may only consume 1,500 or 1,800. And that's okay, right? If that's all you can get in 2 or 3 eating windows, right? 2 or 3, I shouldn't say eating window, but 2 or 3 meal times, then that's what your body needed, right? The more active you are, the more lean body tissue that you have, you may notice that you're going to need more calories because you have a higher metabolic rate. And so, you can also add in exercise, strength training, and that will help. Deb asks, what is keto flu? How can I avoid it? Well, keto flu is during the period of adaptation into ketosis, your insulin goes down. And so most people are walking around with higher insulin levels. As insulin goes down, your ability to retain sodium, right? So your sodium retention goes down, and therefore you're excreting more sodium. And what comes with that? Water. And so you become depleted in electrolytes and hydration, and that can make you feel really bad, like you have the flu. And so getting enough electrolytes, salting your foods well, perhaps taking an electrolyte powder is super helpful, and that will help prevent the keto flu. Jennifer says, what is the best time for HIIT, high intensity interval training, weight training, oil pulling, eating? Okay, so she has several questions there. So resistance training, what's the best time for it? Ideally, I like it right before I start my eating window. So, in the masterclass, we talked about intermittent fasting. We talked about having a certain eating window where you might eat in like an 8-hour eating window, let's say 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 12 p.m. to 8 p.m., for example. So then you would do your workout right before you start your eating window. So if you're starting your eating window at 10 a.m., you might work out at 9 a.m. And that way you work out, shower, change, whatever you need to do, and then you're eating after that, right? And that's a great time. So you're kind of fully fasted. I love that sort of fully fasted training. And that works great. Outside of that, you got to do it whenever your schedule really allows. For some people that have really very busy schedules, are not able to customize it. So they may need to do it early in the morning, or they may need to do it, at the end of work or whatever it is. Ideally, though, doing it in some level of fasted state is best. You wouldn't obviously want to do this, an hour or two after eating, because you could compromise your digestive system. So that's not a good idea. Now, oil pulling, where you put in like some coconut oil in your mouth and swish it around for 10 or 15 minutes, that helps grab up pathogens and microbial debris that's in your mouth. I like to do that first thing in the morning. I think that's the best time to do that. So first thing in the morning, when you wake up, throw some coconut oil or some olive oil in your mouth, swish it around. Great time for prayer, gratitude, for journaling, for reading scripture, while you're oil pulling, right? You might even stretch or walk outside or something like that. So you can obviously multitask. You don't have to just sit there and oil pull. You should be multitasking with your time there, but that's a great time. The pathogen load is high first thing in the morning. You probably have your worst breath of the day, when you wake up in the morning, and that's a great time again to get in there and start pulling that stuff out of there. Now, let's see some other questions we're dealing with here. Let me scroll down on this sheet. Okay. Lynn asks, can you further explain the difference between C8 and C10 MCT oils? Which should I be eating in my diet? So C8 and C10 are caprylic and capric acid, and they are two forms of medium chain triglycerides. Now, the C8 is the most ketogenic. Okay, so when you see like MCT oil or MCT oil powder, it's usually a combination of C8, C10, and C12, lauric acid. The one that is the most ketogenic and easiest on your gut is your C8 caprylic acid. Okay. And so I like to get a C8 only MCT oil in an oil form, and you can add that to different things. I put it in like a protein shake. You can add it to meat or something like that, or just take it on the side, like a teaspoon or so, with a meal. And what that does is that turns immediately into ketones. And those ketones help balance your blood sugar, your insulin levels, help prevent against cravings and overeating. And they get right up into your brain and reduce inflammation in your brain, support brain energy metabolism. So you feel really sharp. Okay. And so you'll notice that you just feel really good. Now, the only key is if you do too much MCT oil at once, especially early on when you first take this, you can end up with digestive problems. And so that's why I recommend starting with like a teaspoon with each meal. For some people, if you notice that you're very sensitive to it, or if you had digestive problems with it in the past, you might start with like a quarter teaspoon or a half a teaspoon. So you have to see where your kind of tolerance point is to start. But I found that probably about 75% of the population, taking a teaspoon with a meal doesn't cause any unwanted symptoms, and you get a lot of benefits. And you can work your way up to taking like a tablespoon with a meal. There's a lot of people that are doing that, seeing really great results. Again, reducing cravings, improving mental clarity, reducing the desire to overeat, right? C8 MCT oil could really, really help with those things, and just reducing inflammation in general. So great question, Lynn. I really like C8 MCT oil. We sell a great one on my website. It's called Keto Brain because it turns right into ketones to help fuel the brain. I love it. I take it every single day. Again, it's just an oil form, no flavor, no taste. It's derived from coconut oil, so it's vegan, but it doesn't have a coconut oil flavor. Technically, you can cook with it. However, I like to just kind of either put it in a shake or take it straight up because I want to maximize the amount that gets into my body. And, if I'm cooking with it, it might end up on the pan. So, although it can handle heat. So just remember that. Sheila asks, what about my high cholesterol? I have heard that people's cholesterol has raised after starting the ketogenic diet. which I can't afford for that to happen. So my total cholesterol is over 300. Great question, Sheila. We go through this in great detail in the masterclass. We talk all about cholesterol and the cholesterol myth. And when we're looking at lipids, and so we're looking at your lipid profile, which is the test where you see your total cholesterol. The only thing I really am concerned about there is your triglycerides. Triglycerides should always be under 100. Ideally, they should be around 1-to-1 with your HDL. So if your triglycerides are 80 and your HDL is 70, let's say, it's a pretty good ratio, very close to 1 if you divide your triglycerides by your HDL. So, again, keep those triglycerides under 100. You should be doing fine if you do that. Your HDL should be certainly up over 50, right? Should be somewhere between 50 and 80. Okay. And that's a sign, your triglyceride to HDL ratio should be close to 1. So that's a sign that you're very metabolically healthy. Your total cholesterol, your total LDL really isn't that big a deal. For most people, you're going to see the ratio of LDL, which, they call the bad cholesterol, although it's actually a bus, a carrier that's bringing fat soluble nutrients like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K, coenzyme Q10, different lipids for the cell membrane. It's got things like phosphatidylcholine in it, phospholipids to help support the cell membrane. So it's got all these powerful nutrients it's trying to bring to the cell. And so I don't really care where that is. However, for most people, you're going to notice that your LDL to HDL ratio is going to be 3-to-1 or less, meaning 3 parts LDL to 1 part HDL or less. And that's a very healthy range. Now, there is something called a lean mass hyperresponder, where a very lean person that has, a decent amount of muscle mass, but very low body fat, they start on a low carb ketogenic style diet, and their LDL goes very, very, very high. And this is actually shown to be, really no significance, right? It's healthy, no issues because their triglycerides are down. All their markers of, insulin sensitivity, blood sugar sensitivity, inflammation are normal, right? So their hemoglobin A1C is, 5.2 or less percent. Their C-reactive protein is under 1. Their triglycerides are under 100. Their HDL, their triglyceride to HDL ratio is close to 1. So all good signs, right? So there's no real issue there. So do not base your health, your arterial health, or really any component of your health on your total cholesterol. Do not ever do that. Look at your triglycerides, look at your HDL, right? Is it close to 1? Are your triglycerides under 100? That's all you really need to look at when it comes to your lipid profile. So again, lipid profile, it basically, there's 3 things it looks at, or 4 things: total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, and triglycerides. The only thing you really need to concern yourself with is triglycerides and maybe HDL, getting that in that 50 to 80, maybe up to 90 range. Okay. But ideally keeping those triglycerides under 100. That's the key. Hopefully that helps you there. And remember, check out the masterclass, right? Because I go through that in great detail. I break down all the science. I go through different studies. So make sure you're checking that out. Andy asks, what is the difference between coconut oil and palm oil, right? Very good question. Coconut oil has a higher amount of medium chain triglycerides than palm oil, roughly about 15% of the fats. Well, actually about 50% of the fats are considered MCTs in coconut oil, but 35% are lauric acid, the C12. So only 15% are the C8 and the C10, which are the more ketogenic ones. Palm oil is mostly longer chain saturated fat. So stearic acid and palmitic acid. It's not terrible, but there are some concerns as far as with palm oil, how it's being harvested. Is it affecting the monkey population? Things like that. In general, I'd recommend trying to stick more so with coconut oil, as a key. There's something called red palm oil, which may have some health benefits. With the red has polyphenols in it. So that can be beneficial. Let's see. Joy asks, can fat fasting help one get into ketosis? And can one eat too much fat in a day? So great question, Joy. So fat fasting is basically where you're consuming, and you can do it in multiple different ways. You could do like intermittent fasting, where you're just consuming fats in the morning. A lot of people do this, bulletproof coffee, for example, they've got like butter and MCT oil in their coffee, but they don't have any protein or carbohydrates. So they're getting calories, but it's just from fat. And you can also do it where, that's basically all you do through the day, right? You're consuming 500-600 calories during the day, but it's all from fat, very little to no protein, very little to no carbohydrate. And can that help you get in ketosis? Absolutely. It definitely can. And so I think that can be helpful. Can you eat too much fat in a day? Of course you can, overeat. And oftentimes you'll notice you just have more digestive issues. You may notice pain kind of over your upper right quadrant, liver gallbladder type issues, loose stools, kind of stools that float or they're greasy. They may be like very pale in color. You may notice pain in kind of your upper right shoulder blade region, right? These are all signs that you're not metabolizing the fat very well. You may be consuming too much fat in your diet. You may have sluggish bile flow with your liver gallbladder. So, when we look at like roughly 60 or so % of your diet, your calories, 60 to 70% coming from fat. So that would mean roughly 1,200 to 1,400 calories, for the average person coming from fat. So what does that mean as far as grams? There's 9 grams of fat, 9 calories per gram of fat. So, you're looking at roughly somewhere around, 120 grams or so of fat, right? 120 to maybe 140 grams of fat in a day, right? And so you don't really need to consume too much more unless you're consuming a lot more calories. Okay. So, can you consume too much fat? Yes, you can consume too many calories in general, for sure. Absolutely, you can. So, just, obviously keep track of that and keep track of how you're digesting it. Sophia asks, what if I'm sensitive to coconut? Will it be okay to consume MCT oil? Good question. If you are having sensitivities to coconut, you most likely are not going to be able to do very well with MCT oil, although you can try it. For some people, it's really the long chain fats that are in the coconut oil that they struggle with. So you might start with like a low dose MCT oil and just see how your body feels. Okay. Linda asks, how much apple cider vinegar does Dr. Jockers recommend we take each day? Great question. Well, if your body's doing well on apple cider vinegar, I'm a big fan of doing about a tablespoon in roughly 4 ounces of water and drinking that before each meal. That will actually help with the production of digestive juices, stomach acid, bile, pancreatic enzymes to help you metabolize your food more effectively. That's going to help you with the digestion. So try that out. Milton asks, how do I make sure I get enough electrolytes? That's a great question, Milton. In general, I recommend just kind of salting your foods well, consuming foods in general that are rich in trace minerals. That's going to be your grass-fed meats, your wild-caught fish, your avocados, dark green leafy vegetables, things like olives can be really helpful. Fermented foods, sauerkraut, pickles, things like that. They've got natural sodiums and electrolyte and things like that in there. Celery, cucumbers. So consuming, fruits, vegetables, those are, and grass-fed, wild-caught animal products are going to be really helpful sources. And then just salting your foods to taste. And if you're feeling just kind of like a little bit of low energy or dizzy or something like that, taking a little bit of salt and putting it on your tongue is very, very helpful. Okay. So you can do that as well. Judy says, how do I calculate how many carbs, fat, and protein is right for me? Well, good question, Judy. And we talk about this in the Keto Masterclass, but roughly, again, most individuals are needing about 2,000 calories a day. Okay. Most women, I should say. Some men need a little bit more, depending on your metabolic rate and your muscle mass. And so you're looking at, roughly 5 to 10% of your calories coming from carbs. So if it's 2,000 calories, that's going to be 20 to 40 grams of carbs. So it's 4 grams of calories per 4 calories per gram of carbohydrates. So 20 grams of carbohydrates is roughly 80 calories, for example. So it's roughly 20 to 50, I should say, 25 to 50 grams would be, 100 to 200 calories, which is 5 to 10% of your overall calorie load. Fat has 9 grams. So again, I mentioned 120 to maybe 140 grams of fat. And then your protein, if let's say you're looking at trying to get about 30% of your calories from protein. So then you would want roughly, so that'd be 600 calories. So roughly in that case, roughly 150 grams of protein. Your protein, you want somewhere between 20 to 30% of your calories. So 20% would be 400 calories. So that's 100 grams. So 100 to 150 grams of protein, kind of broken up in your meals, 2 to 3 meals a day. Let's see. Milton asks, does the doctor tell us what is the highest carb total per day to eat and still be considered low carb? Good question. In the literature, it's roughly around 200, 250 grams of carbohydrates or less to be considered low carb, but that's actually fairly high carb of, especially net carbs. So I would say anything under 100 grams of net carbs is low carb. Now, to get into ketosis, you may need a lot lower, right? You may need, 25 grams of net carbs or lower, maybe, to get into ketosis. So, we talk about that and go through that in the masterclass, so you can check that out. All right, let's see. Christina asks, what is the best thing one can do after such a momentary lapse to try to reestablish blood sugar balance? Take some supplements like berberine, chromium, go for a super long walk, drink a lot of water, fast for 12 hours, eat some protein with some good fats. What works the best in fastest? So if you have a blood sugar spike, right? If you're eating a meal, it is a good idea to add in like some protein and some fat with that meal. And that can help. And absolutely, like if it's at the moment, you can take some supplements like berberine, chromium, cinnamon, vanadium, right? So you can get some of these minerals like chromium and vanadium. B vitamins can be helpful. Magnesium can be helpful. And then herbs like berberine, alpha lipoic acid, which is not an herb, but it's more of a compound. Cinnamon can be really helpful. Gynema is another one that can be really helpful. And usually you can find a lot of these, in like a supplement complex. Like we have one called Sugar Support that's got berberine, cinnamon, gynema, and some other herbs in it to help with this. So all of that can be helpful. Take a long walk after your meal for sure. Get some movement in. That can be helpful. Drink a lot of water. I wouldn't do that like right after the meal or with the meal, but later on for sure, you can hydrate well, which will just reduce stress off your body. And then absolutely, right after that meal or, overnight, if it was during the day, let's say, for the next day, do a deeper intermittent fast, 12, 14, ideally going 16, 18 hours, without food. And that will help your body deplete extra glycogen and turn on fat burning. So that could be very helpful. So hopefully that helps, Christina. You can also do, like right after the meal or, whatever, you can do some air squats, right? Or ideally even before the meal, you can do some air squats, which will activate the GLUT4 receptor in your muscles, which will act like insulin and pull the sugar that comes into your system out of the bloodstream and put it into the cells to be used for energy, which will reduce the amount of insulin your body needs to produce. And that's one of the keys. We want to reduce the overall amount of insulin, and that will really help. Okay, session 6. So this is a question from Kathy. Session 6 mentioned it was good to backload carbs, eating later in the day. I just read an Eating Well article that states bulk of carbs should be eaten earlier in the day due to most people not being as active later in the day and not needing the fuel. So she has questions about that. Yeah, and I talk about that in session 6. Why backloading carbs can be helpful. So if you stay very low carb during the day, it's going to reduce your overall cravings. So I recommend very low carbohydrate throughout the daytime. So consuming mostly protein and fats when you're consuming meals. And then when you have your carbs, have them in the evening because they're actually going to help produce serotonin. A lot of people notice that they sleep better when they have a little bit more carbs in the evening for the production of serotonin and melatonin. And I would not worry at all about the carbs turning into fat as long as, again, you're keeping the carbs in moderation. And the reason why is because you're fasting or you're eating very low carb during the day. So you're suppressing your insulin. Okay. And so that insulin is going to activate active thyroid hormone, as long as you're insulin sensitive, and you're still going to be burning fat, throughout the night, even if you ate, a little bit of extra carbs. And I know this is more a complex topic, right? So, depending on the quantity of carbs that you're consuming and things like that. But in general, if, you have carbs, but you consume them in like one eating period, right? One meal, and you're not consuming the carbohydrates outside of that, your body has a lot of buffer room there, right? And it's going to fill up its muscle glycogen, its liver glycogen that was depleted for the other 23 hours that you were not consuming the carbohydrates. So it's going to fill that up before it even fills up the fat cells. And so during the day, you're depleting your muscle and your liver glycogen, and then you're turning on fat burning and you're getting your insulin down. And so when you consume a little bit more carbohydrates in like an evening meal, you get some positive adaptations, extra production of serotonin, melatonin, so better sleep quality. You're also getting activation because your insulin's a little bit higher, a little activation of your thyroid hormone, more free hormone, testosterone, estrogen, which can help again with fat burning and just overall, feeling good. And then you're reducing, you're not consuming carbohydrates the other 23 hours. So you're going to, again, get back into a certain balance of fat burning and deplete your glycogen levels and have very good insulin sensitivity. So you do not need to worry about that. Okay. And that the idea that eating carbs early in the day is important because we're more active is really short-sighted. It's kind of like this idea that we have to eat the carbs then. So then, we're more active during the day. So we're burning them up for energy and they're not stored as fat. You got to look at more of a cumulative idea. And so the cumulative idea is if we can keep our insulin down during the day, we're going to have less cravings. Therefore, we're going to end up consuming less overall, carbohydrates. And we're going to feel like we have better energy and mental clarity throughout the day as well. Let's see. Randall asks, I feel too skinny and can't seem to gain back some weight for my height. I believe the body has a set point, but I'm concerned that on keto, I'll lose even more weight and don't want that. Yeah, this is important. So if you feel like you are underweight, you can still get more metabolically healthy by following a ketogenic diet. However, I would recommend doing strength training, consuming higher amounts of protein, right? So more like 30% of your daily calories from protein, which will help with lean body mass development. Make sure you're consuming, again, just enough calories in general, but the strength training is super key, right? That's super key. And then you may consider, doing a little bit more feasting. You may need 1 or 2 really good feast meals every single week, right? Where you're consuming more carbohydrates. Okay. But getting enough protein, consuming a lot of protein. I would recommend even like a gram of protein per pound of body weight. So if you weigh 150 pounds, consuming 150 grams of protein in a day, and doing the strength training at least 3 times a week, if not more, maybe 4 or 5 times, and lifting fairly heavy too, like really challenging your muscles, will help you maintain lean body mass and feel really good. So great question. Fasting. Here's a fasting question from Kathy. Can I add MCT oil or heavy cream to my coffee while I'm fasting? You can. That will blunt some of the benefits of fasting, but you'll still get a lot of benefits of the fasting. And for many people, they notice if they add MCT oil or heavy cream to their coffee, it actually helps them fast longer, reduces cravings, helps them feel just really good, mentally clear. If you're one of those people, then great. I would do it. If it's harder for you to fast without adding that in there, then add it in. And if that allows you to fast and feel great and be able to fast till 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon and not even think about food, I think there's a lot of benefit to that. Me personally, I've noticed that I just don't feel as good fasting when I'm having MCT oil or heavy cream. So I don't consume any calories during my fasting window. And then during my eating window, that would be a time where not that I do this regularly, but if I had a coffee, I could do MCT oil or heavy cream in it, just fine. And that would be, better. So I have it during the eating window. Judy asks, when do you recommend adding fasting to my diet? Should I start with a water fast or wait? Great question, Judy. In the program, in the masterclass, I talk about 12-hour overnight fast. That's where we start. We call it the simple fast. Then we'll try to bump it up to about a 14-hour fast, right, in week 2. And then we're trying to really move it into the kind of that 16-hour fast and eating in an 8-hour window, maybe 8, maybe in some cases extending out to 10 hours. And we're doing that as our body gets more metabolically flexible and more metabolically healthy. So intermittent fasting, we start fairly quickly. Okay. And people adapt and respond well. Now, ultimately, we want to get you to where you're doing a 1-day, 20 to 24-hour fast. That's a sign of great metabolic health. We want to get you there. That's a sign that your body's very good at burning fat for fuel. And that's a desired physiological state. Okay. Now, as far as doing like a water fast for 3 or 5 days, once you're able to do a 20 to 24-hour fast, so like a fasting from lunch to lunch, like I do every week from Wednesday, from lunch to Thursday at lunch, I do a fast. I'm not consuming any calories. Once you get to that point, now you can do like a 3 or 5 day fast, and that can really jumpstart fat burning, can really bring down inflammation. So once you get to that point, you can just schedule it in and find a time where, 3 or 4 or 5 days, you can do a fast, water fast, or you could do a green juice fast or a bone broth fast or fasting mimicking diet, and you can get extra benefits that way. So you can check that out. And we have a lot of good content on my website too about that, how to prepare for a water fast, break a water fast, things like that. Maria asks, I am doing intermittent fasting of 12 to 16 hours daily. I first take my thyroid medicine, then supplements after an hour. Do the supplements, the vitamins affect the fasting, or it must be water only? In general, no. So there are certain supplements that do better when you are consuming food, like omega-3 fats, of course, enzymes, stomach acid like betaine HCl, digestive enzymes. You only want to take those with a meal. Vitamin D, zinc, those things absorb best when they're with meals. But they shouldn't affect your fast. If you're noticing that taking any sort of vitamins or supplements or medications causes more cravings, right? As opposed to if you didn't do it, then it may be bumping up your insulin levels, right? And so you do have to be careful there. And also, if you are diabetic and you're taking insulin, you don't want to do that while you're fasting. That's going to drive down your blood sugar too much, cause cravings, could be really actually a medical emergency, right? Where your blood sugar may go down too low and you may pass out. So be very careful with that. And if you are taking diabetic medication, be sure to be talking to your doctor about this. You'd only want to be taking, insulin or something like that with meals, right? Because that's the whole job of it, is to help bring down the blood sugar. And if your blood sugar is already lowering, you don't need that help. Okay. Couple more questions here. Lucy asks, how does the keto diet help Parkinson's disease? And it does. There's research out there showing the improvements. And that's because Parkinson's is an issue where there is hypoxia, there's inflammation in general in a part of the brain, the basal ganglia, causing kind of the tremors and the altered movement patterns. And so how does it help? It helps bring down inflammation in the brain, all different parts of the brain. And when we help regulate that inflammation, it allows those neurons to function better. Also, the ketones help with something called mitochondrial uncoupling, this uncoupling process of the mitochondria. They also help produce more new, healthy, more stress-resilient mitochondria. And the healthier, more stress-resilient mitochondria in these neurons are better able to produce energy with less oxidative stress. And the better energy production, the better your neurology is going to function. So absolutely. Denise asks, will keto help with my husband's gout? So her husband has gout. What we see with gout primarily is more or less like a fructose intolerance, right? So when the body's trying to break down fructose, which is kind of the main sugar, we see high fructose corn syrup and a lot of soft drinks, things like that. And it's also the main sugar in fruit. When it's breaking that down, it will produce higher amounts of uric acid, and that can contribute to gout. So will keto help my husband's gout? I have seen a lot of improvements with people with gout by getting their insulin sensitivity better, reducing their overall load of fructose in their system. So for sure, I definitely think it will be very helpful. So I think that will be very helpful. Let's see. Judy asks, I've been diagnosed with kidney failure and I'm on dialysis. Would a keto diet be safe and help me? And, one of the biggest things we see with kidney failure is insulin resistance. When you have high blood sugar, the sugar molecules will bind to proteins, okay, and they'll create a process called glycation. And this glycation process ends up creating these advanced glycation end products, AGEs. And these AGEs are like shrapnel going through the bloodstream, where they massively damage the endothelial lining of the blood vessels, and they damage the blood vessels in the kidney, which can over time lead to kidney failure. And so this is why diabetics oftentimes, get kidney failure, because they have high amounts of these AGEs and a high amount of glycation damaging the kidneys. So keto really works to help improve insulin sensitivity and bring down inflammation, which, if the kidney failure is due to chronic inflammation and glycation, then it's going to really improve it. If there's, other congenital issues that are taking place, then you may not see as much improvement. But in general, trying to bring down inflammation is super critical, for pretty much almost any condition out there. Let's see. Laura asks, I would love to know how the keto diet could help me continue to prevent diabetes and minimize its negative effects. Well, by improving insulin sensitivity and reducing glycation. I mean, that's really, with diabetes, you have insulin resistance and you have advanced glycation end products that are forming, damaging tissues. So that's exactly what keto works on, reduces both of those things, improves insulin sensitivity, brings down your blood sugar, and provides an alternative fuel source in the ketones that bring down inflammation in the body, support the brain. And so that's how it helps prevent diabetes. Carolyn asks, how can you implement this if you think you have leaky gut? And I'm starting to wonder if fat breakdown is a problem with sloppy stools with food in them. Great question, Carolyn. And a lot of people have this, and this is because their bile flow is really poor. So you need bile, which is produced by your liver. It's produced by the liver. So even if you don't have your gallbladder, you're still producing it in the liver. It can be stored in the gallbladder. It's a storage form. And bile helps emulsify the fats. So it breaks them down kind of like soap breaking down grease, and allows them to be absorbed more effectively. It also helps sterilize the small intestine, kill off bad bacteria and things like that. So we need good bile flow. And I go through this in detail in the masterclass, but there are different compounds that really, really help with bile flow. So herbs like milk thistle, dandelion, parsley, cilantro, artichokes, right, really help with this. On top of that, you also have things like bile salts, which help to thin the bile, because the bile can be really, really thick and sluggish. So TUDCA is a great compound. Taurine, choline, these are bile salts that help thin down the bile, and they can be really, really helpful. And you may need to, just reduce the overall amount of calories and fat in each meal, and maybe eat 3 meals a day that are a little bit, lower calorie, and add in those herbs and things like that. And that can also be helpful. So you can do that as opposed to eating like 2 big meals. And that, again, that can be really helpful, and consume a lot of those bitter herbs. We always say bitter is good for your liver. So consuming these sorts of bitter herbs can be really helpful. Let's see. Eileen says, can a keto diet cause problems with bile flow? Not in general. It's not going to cause problems with bile flow. The bile flow problems are most likely already there, but perhaps they're not challenged because you're not consuming, high amounts of fat. So your body's not feeling the need to produce a lot of bile, but the bile ducts are most likely already congested, and they can be congested from insulin resistance, not consuming, having high levels of insulin will cause congestion in there. They can be congested due to parasites, having high toxic exposure, right? A number of reasons why. Dehydration can be another factor. So constipation, another one. So getting your bowels moving well, hydrating your body really well, taking the electrolytes, consuming, these sort of bitters, arugula, dandelion, right? Drinking ginger tea, consuming some radishes and artichokes. These things can all really help. Dandelion tea, can be helpful. So consuming all of those things to really get the bile moving well will be very helpful, and possibly even considering some supplements, maybe taking TUDCA, right? We have a great TUDCA complete supplement on our store that you can check out. People see amazing results with. We also have another one called BioFlow Support that are great for helping with this. And then you may even need a little bit of extra support, extra bile support. And so we have a supplement called Super Digest HCl, which also has ox bile in it to help your body provide a little bit more extra bile for the fat metabolism. Grace asks, is heartburn normal when starting keto? No, heartburn is really never normal, right? To have heartburn. So that's not normal. And so it may be a sign that you're not producing enough stomach acid. And we talk about that in the masterclass, that, believe it or not, acid reflux, even though it's like acid, is actually typically a sign of not enough acid. You're not producing enough acid. See, at rest, your stomach environment is roughly 3 to 3.5 pH. Now, in order to break down some protein like a steak, you need to get your acid levels to 1.5 to 2.0. And it's a big jump. It takes a lot of energy for your body to produce enough acid to get it from 3 to 3.5 to 1.5 to 2.0. For a lot of people, they're not able to produce enough stomach acid. I see this very commonly. And therefore, the food gets in and the acid starts to raise and it can produce gas because they don't have enough acid to sterilize and break down the bacteria and break down the protein. And now the 3 to 3.5 acid will jump up into the esophagus. And that's still very acidic and can still cause problems. And that's where the heartburn will come from. Remember how earlier I said taking a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar and 4 ounces of water before meals is a great idea? For a lot of people, they notice a lot of improvement there. Now, if you do that, you take the apple cider vinegar with the meal and you don't get improvement. In fact, you actually feel worse. You have pain in your gut. That could be a sign you have a weak intestinal or a weak stomach lining. The mucosa in your stomach has broken down. And, so we need to really focus in on healing the mucosa with things like aloe vera, L-glutamine, licorice root, marshmallow root, things like that to help support the gut mucosa and the mucosa in the stomach. However, most people notice that they feel a lot better. They digest their food better, right? They have less heartburn, better bile flow when they take the apple cider vinegar within water with a meal, right? And so that's a great strategy to try there. So guys, I went through a lot of questions here. It's been close to an hour here. So hopefully it's been very, very helpful for you. I do want to remind you guys, take advantage of the special offer on the Keto Masterclass. This is for a limited time. And this special offer really gives you the entire masterclass, all the different trainings, the transcripts of those trainings. I mean, we did a lot of very detailed training on keto and on metabolic health, and gives you all those transcripts as well that you can read through, and tons of bonuses. So this is a really great opportunity, and it's only going to be at this price for a limited time. So be sure to take advantage of it, guys. And hopefully you enjoyed this Q&A and that it really helped guide you and move you in the right direction. Also, be sure to join our keto Facebook group if you want to continue to ask questions. And, obviously you can subscribe to my podcast, Dr. Jockers Functional Nutrition Podcast, where we do a monthly Q&A session going into detail on a lot of different things, myself and my health coaches. And we also have a lot of really great trainings on the podcast and on the YouTube channel as well. So be sure to check that out. And again, wishing you guys all the best on your metabolic health journey. And I look forward to seeing you and doing another video training for you guys very soon. Be blessed, everybody. We'll see you soon.